All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of Expected by Whom. We gotta kick things off with kind of a record that I don't know you want to hold, but Mike Babcock now finishes his Columbus Blue Jackets tenure as the ninth winningest coach in franchise history, having coached exactly 0 games, thanks to his decision to, I should say, mutual decision to resign following the report that came out of Spit and Chicklets regarding his kind of perusing player phones. Sean, you got any thoughts here?
Yes, I have some thoughts here. The craziest thing about all of this to me has been not that Mike Babcock's tenure in Columbus ended poorly. I mean, it's something that from the first time this was floated, like in early June. And remember this all started with, it was floated in early June or late May. I can't remember the exact timeline, but early May, early June starts getting floated out there that he's a Leafs employee until officially like midnight before July 1st. So the whole thing where Columbus doesn't have a coach, and then we know who the coach is going to be, and basically Babcock milks to the end of the Leafs contract so he can continue to make $5.25 million or $5 million per year, whatever it is from the Leafs. Then he becomes the head coach officially on July 1st. It was always going to be, in all of this, though, like looking from the outside, and at least some Blue Jackets press admitted this yesterday in their press conference, there was always going to be has this guy changed? There's the very famous Johan Franzen story where it's you should go look it up. It's a very sad story about a player, about how he treated Johan Franzen. There's the Mitch Marner story of the ranking your teammates' effort story and everything like that. And all of these things where Babcock has never really shown any public remorse for this. It's always been every story you've read, things like that. You'll see things where you get a lot of the, I'm sorry someone felt that way. It's never the, I'm sorry. Like, you never saw that. I personally never saw that, and I'm a hockey writer, so if I never saw it, I don't know how I could have missed it. So if it's out there and I missed it, fine. But in general, there was never really the public apology or actually proven. And so comes into Columbus, and it's going to be a mess. And part of the reporting is part of the reasons he picked Columbus was, it was kind of off the beaten path, and it was under the radar in the hockey world and everything like that. And he goes, and we get the story that comes out on Spit and Chicklets last week, where he's taking players' phones and he's asking to see what type of man they are or whatever. And then the very, very quick the team issued a refutal of those facts quickly from both Blue Jackets captain Boone Jenner, Babcock himself, and then Johnny Gaudreau at the NHL Player Media Tour, who, not really sure what else Johnny Gaudreau is going to do in that spot, because you're asking him directly about his boss, who he is going to go and have to work with 5 days or a week from then. Like, I'm not really sure what else Johnny Gaudreau and Boone Jenner are going to do in that spot. I actually feel really bad for them kind of getting roped into this. But the really interesting thing about all of this is it's the PA investigation that really leads to the quote unquote resignation. Like, it's resignation. He was fired, right? Like, the PA goes into all of this, and the PA investigation comes out and basically says there's no way that he can coach an NHL team. We can't co-sign this, and basically puts the Blue Jackets in a situation where you have to find a way to make sure he's no longer coaching that team. It becomes resignation, firing, whatever terminology you want to use. He's basically out for what he did. My biggest issue has been kind of the fact where John Davidson and Jarmo Kekalainen speak yesterday, and they're talking about, John Davidson had a quote where it's something along the lines of, some people wondered what was up, and maybe those people were right. We owe an apology or whatever. But at the same time, in the press release, they thank Babcock for his professionalism on the way out. Like, they thank him for it. And to me, that just sat really wrong to me. And at the same time, Kekalainen said in his press conference yesterday there's a hard power dynamic where maybe players don't really feel they can come to management with problem. And I know that the GM player dynamic is a bit weird. I know that. That's okay. But do you think maybe part of the problem is you thanking the guy on his way out for his professionalism? Do you think maybe that could have something to do with it, where the players always feel you're not going to side with them? So I think with this whole thing with Columbus is, obviously Babcock should not have been coaching. He shouldn't have been the coach there. He's on his way out. That's good. I'm glad whichever young players did stand up and raise their grievance. I'm glad they did. It's sad that it is sad that and before this gets clipped and gets used in a way of me attacking another podcast, I want to be very clear on this. It's sad that it had to come out the way it did. It shouldn't have been. This is nothing against Spitting Chicklets. This is nothing against any other podcast. But the fact of the matter is, the players didn't feel they had an avenue to report this without going to a podcast. If there's no recourse for players in Columbus to bring this up and they think something will actually get done otherwise, and maybe something was brought up and it was just kind of swept under the rug and something like that, that to me is the bigger story here, is how it had to come out. And it's frustrating because that means the players didn't have any power to bring this up otherwise. And so, as I said, I want to be very clear. I'm not ripping any other podcast. It's just sad that it had to happen that way because the players didn't have a safe way to bring up what was an abuse of power against them.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think, from that perspective, like you're at least thankful that they felt comfortable disclosing to somebody who was then able to bring these to light. But you're disappointed that there wasn't an avenue within the organization that they felt comfortable. And then when you hear Jarmo's comments on top that, I've, really kind of struggled to make some of those connections, and it's not necessarily clear. Like that's sort of your job as the general manager, right? And you've been there 10 years now. So to have those issues and then not have your players be comfortable. And for those that aren't intimately familiar with why this is such a big deal, I'm going to just give a quick history here. We're talking about a coach who, this isn't just like flipping through, this isn't just asking to see pictures of somebody's family. In Detroit, we obviously have the Johan Franzen story that comes out when Chris Chelios is actually the first one to raise the flag on this, where he says, some of the stuff that Babcock was doing, not in private, but literally in front of everybody on the bench, verbally berating Johan Franzen to the point where Franzen was dreading coming to the rink. He dreaded having to come and be in that space. And even Chelios said that went way past the line, but that nobody in the Red Wings front office was willing to do that. In fact, I think Chelios tells the story that Ken Holland came down to the dressing room and said, if anyone has an issue with it, come up to my office. We can find a trade for you. That kind of thing. This is Mike Babcock scratching Mike Modano. In the last week of the regular season, Mike Modano sitting on 1,499 games. The Red Wings have clinched a playoff spot. And Babcock scratches Modano, so Modano never hits game 1,500 in what was his final season. There's Mike Babcock refusing to dress Chris Chelios for the Winter Classic in Chicago, where Chris Chelios' hometown, where he played so many years, where he's having his jersey retired, like we talked about on the last episode. Babcock did not want to play Chris Chelios. He wanted to scratch him. The front office at the time said, you can't scratch Chris. You can't do this, to a guy who's, Chelios at this time, I think is 42, 43 years old. You just can't do this. So what does Babcock do? He plays Chelios on the first shift and then benches him the rest of the game because it was sending a message of no one's going to do that. And that's just what he did in Detroit. You get to what he did to Mitch Marner in terms of, bringing Marner in, asking him to rank the players that, don't have the best work ethic, and then openly sharing that with the players, in that scenario. It's abusive power dynamics. And then you start to get a summary of what exactly Babcock did with these phones, from the most recent Spit and Chicklets episode. Bissonnette kind of goes a little bit deeper into what was shared. And some of these instances happen at Babcock's house, where he's inviting players over for lunch, going through their phones. And then in one instance, Bissonnette actually says Babcock flips through the photos and then told the player to leave without lunch. Like, this is not some innocent get to know you kind of thing. This is a massive abuse of power. And so, I think it's a black mark on Jarmo for undertaking this, black mark on John Davidson for deciding to go with this. In fact, they even, make a mention that that Jarmo said he didn't see a problem with what Babcock did. And I think that's a big issue. And this isn't something that's just changed in today. It's just, this is a massive abuse of power.
My biggest issue has been, and I saw like Frank Saravelli wrote a piece yesterday, rightfully calling for responsibility and accountability from Kekalainen and everything like that. My biggest thing on this has actually been, we've talked about president of hockey operations positions on this show before. My biggest thing has been with Davidson, where if you're president of hockey operations, your job is basically, to put it very bluntly, is to babysit the GM in many cases. Your job is to basically sign off on things and be the that stops embarrassment from happening. And John Davidson was in Columbus, left to go to the Rangers, got fired, and then came back to Columbus. And they basically, and while he was gone, there was no one above Kekalainen, and then they brought him back basically to be in the same spot right above Kekalainen. To me, I don't understand how John Davidson, to me is if I'm in the position of the McConnell family who owns the Blue Jackets and everything like that. This is where I come to the spot of, we trusted you with this decision. We trusted you with making sure the GM does the right thing. You were the sift, the filter that makes sure everything goes the right way. This is on you. This is more so on John Davidson to me than anyone else. And I feel like that's the spot where, like, I don't know, like, I don't know if at some point, I mean, the Blue Jackets only had 59 points last year. If things don't go well this year, Kekalainen could easily be on the hot seat and everything like that. But to me, I look at this more and more, and it just tells me that John Davidson's position is basically a lifelong position, because if he's going to survive this, he's going to survive everything. And B, there's no accountability for that on that. And that's kind of one of the more frustrating things, because to me, this was a spot where, as an ownership group, you can give out a statement, we're disappointed, but you put your money where your mouth is, like, make the decision. And I know you're like, we don't want to disrupt where the team is and everything like that. You have the franchise. I looked this up because I was curious before we came on the show. The Blue Jackets rank 31st in NHL history in playoff wins. Seattle is 32nd. Seattle will probably pass them, because Columbus has 15 playoffs wins. Seattle has 10 right now. So assuming Seattle wins a round this year, Seattle will pass Columbus and move Columbus into the least amount of playoff wins in NHL history. It's not like you're disrupting a boat that's been going smoothly. So I think that this was the grounds to kind of, especially because you have some players, you have some pieces that you can actually build around. Fantilli, watched him in Traverse City this past week, and he's going to be a fun player, a lot of stuff, but I don't really know how much I trust the long-term vision when the two people who hired this guy on July 1st, well, not really July 1st, probably back in February, and just sat on it until July 1st. The fact that they never really, that they missed this when everyone else saw it is the biggest concern to me in all of this.
Yeah, I think to basically summarize it as you just did, yes, Babcock has resigned. That, and you hope the organization can move forward. But I think there does need to be a deeper and further conversation of, one, why when you have a team that is very young, and how it's going to be constructed with guys like, Ken Johnson, and with, your Adam Fantillis and a lot of the youth players that you're bringing in, would you in the first place hire a coach that has a history of kind of abusing his position, with veterans and with rookies. And then second, you're sort of disappointed that when the Columbus players ran into an issue with some of the tactics, they didn't have an avenue they felt comfortable with within the organization to address their concerns. And then you finally get to the resignation of Mike Babcock. And actually, before we even get to the resignation, you get to the team statements that were put out, which only now at this point in time can feel like a very quick means to try and quash any sort of investigation. And so major kudos to Ron Hainsey and Marty Walsh of the NHL Players Association for sticking with an investigation to kind of uncover what actually happened here. And then, you get to the final component of Columbus's front office sort of saying, well, we didn't really have a problem with it, but, it was becoming a distraction. And we want to thank him for his professional.
I do have more confidence in the PA today, though, actually. One of the things we were always... the PA was bullied for years, right? And then there was basically Gary Bettman. You want to talk about whether Gary Bettman's a good or bad commissioner. Gary Bettman works for the owners. His job is to beat the PA, head of the PA. That's his job. That's his job, is to get the better deal for the owners and the players. He did that for years. Marty Walsh comes in, and this is one of the first big challenges and tests Marty Walsh faced. And Ron Hainsey is a recent player, and it was actually Ron Hainsey is actually one of the players who spoke up when name of the coach who was in Calgary. Why I'm drawing a blank on his name.
So Bill
Peters,
from Sarah Sivian's story.
From Sarah Sivian's story, where Ron Hainsey is one of the players that actually stood up and said something to Bill Peters that this isn't right, you can't do this. And so I have more confidence in Marty Walsh and Ron Hainsey actually fighting for the players now. And hopefully from this perspective, hopefully this is that kind of beacon to players that when you have an issue like this, you can go to the PA. I just don't feel like that was something that players felt like they had under the prior leadership of the PA. They felt it was more of, well, our biggest job is to keep labor peace. We don't really rock the boat. We're going to kind of just find the happy medium, where Marty Walsh feels more combative. He feels more about he's actually a union rep as opposed to an appeaser to the other side. And that's good. So I think that's a positive. I hate that it took this to say that, but that's a positive to come out of this.
Yeah, and just a quick aside on Marty Walsh before we get into the real crux here. I know a lot of people were initially concerned with, Walsh coming on, being from the Boston area, his relationships with, the Bruins owner Jeremy Jacobs. Just from a personal anecdote standpoint, I've gotten the opportunity to meet Marty Walsh. He's a tremendous character, or he has tremendous character, I should say. He's very genuine in the way that he cares about folks, and people don't know his backstory. Most people don't know that he's a recovering alcoholic. He hit rock bottom. Sought treatment for that, is kind of openly speaks about it, actually spoke about it at the Jamie Daniels Foundation Roast and Toast of Thomas Holmstrom and Nick Lidstrom, wants to be involved in that, actually provided a video that got shared there. But, in the context where I got a chance to meet him, a lot of people know that I have a lot of family in Boston. And so, when Walsh was mayor of Boston, unfortunately one of my cousins passed away, and we were at his funeral, and Marty Walsh shows up, and wanted to just come by and personally, just speak with us as the family for having to go through this. And, you're talking about someone who's the mayor of the town of Boston to stop by a funeral that he knew was happening. And it wasn't because of any sort of direct connection to him that my family had or anything like that. It was just, this was a guy who saw that a 17-year-old kid had died and wanted to make sure that he stopped by to kind of pass along his condolences. So I always have a soft spot for seeing someone like Marty Walsh in terms of who he cares about and the way he carries himself. And so I think you're seeing that carry through now with the way that he's going to handle the NHL Players Association, and that's for the betterment of everybody. And so, on a lighter note, we'll kind of shift some gears here a little bit and bring you back into another episode here. So again, folks, this is Expected by Whom, a podcast exploring the world of hockey through unique lenses, brought to you by the Wing Wheel Podcast. We know a lot of you tuning in are Red Wings fans, and the Wing Wheel Podcast is the biggest and best Detroit Red Wings show out there. Find the show wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts, and go to wingwheelpodcast.com for more. So, Sean, one story you brought up to me that has kind of flown under the radar, probably because of this Babcock news, but also to an extent, people just aren't maybe realizing the downstream implications here. But BioSteel, the official energy drink partner of the NHL, filed for bankruptcy. And that may actually have implications on how the NHL salary cap kind of changes. So I know you wanted to share some kind of information that you had.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things, and it's great that we have this show because I'm not really sure where else one would actually talk about this or care about this, so this is great. And also, actually, it's funny because it relates to Marty Walsh as someone who we talk about his big hurdles and ongoing revenue-related things relate to the PA, obviously. Anyway, so BioSteel files for bankruptcy protection, and BioSteel rather famously at the 2022 draft in Montreal, it gets announced that BioSteel is the new official sports drink partner of the NHL. You look at the bench and now it's all BioSteel bottles and everything like that. I think there's a couple of key things we need to establish real quick for everyone because it's funny. It's easy to see the jokes on Twitter when this news kind of surfaced and everything like that. But to be clear on one thing, players drink BioSteel. I've talked to many, it really is the drink of choice for NHL players. And it's not an ad line. It's just, I've talked to enough players and everything like that. It really is a beverage that most players use in their training regiment. It's not a great commercial success. And part of that is, I don't know if we have someone who's in the beverage industry can correct me on this, but basically the food and beverage industry is an incredibly tough business. It is the trying to break it. That's why you've had some of the stalwarts that have been around for forever, right? Like you have the Gatorades, the Powerades, everything they're typically owned by the bigger companies, the PepsiCos and everything like that. Getting into that space is incredibly difficult. You need to have either a real virality flashpoint, which we actually have seen in that space where you've seen it with that Prime beverage that is launched by, I think it's one of the Paul brothers who launched it. That's had the virality of it's had its niche and it's launched there. But BioSteel always lacked the mass appeal because I've had it before. It's not that it tastes bad, but I know what Gatorade is. I know what Powerade is. I know I can go grab that. Why do I need to go grab this thing that looks like this and that's in a box? And so BioSteel as a commercial product has struggled, and they've leaned heavily into trying to get things going with athlete endorsers and everything like that. And hockey is a big space for that. And one of the biggest things that they kind of one of the bigger things that now that they partner with the NHL, this is supposed to be their launching point. They were all over the draft in Montreal. I'll tell you, I was at the draft in Nashville. BioSteel was there. They fulfilled their obligation to be there, but it was not the blanket coverage. It was clear. It was the shoestring budget. They had Connor McDavid as an athlete. Now, Chris Johnston reported the other day that Connor McDavid's deal with BioSteel had recently expired. And I'm not doubting Chris's source at all, but there is something fishy to me about that because Connor McDavid is still on the BioSteel website. And so if you ever, to give you an idea of how deals like this work, like if you're an athlete or influencer and they say to you, you can use your likeness in promotion, when your deal expires, you typically have a very short window to get things off your website, right? So like if BioSteel and Connor McDavid's deal had truly expired in a normal fashion, Connor McDavid's bio and picture would not be on the website. It's something to me that is not there. And on September 1st, I'm not trying to bury the lead here, but September 1st, the NHL was not paid. There was a missed payment by BioSteel to the NHL. And I don't know the exact valuation of that deal. I've heard it's probably starts somewhere between $15 to $20 million a year is what I've heard. I don't know the exact number, but I've heard it's $15 to $20 million a year in valuation in just like a lump sum payment. That doesn't include the other support things. That doesn't include the cost of providing events and doing marketing and stuff like that. But that's just kind of like the lump sum that's there. On top of that, and so now the NHL, as they go into bankruptcy protection and everything like that, eventually the NHL will be a creditor that is owed money by BioSteel. It's not just the NHL. There are 6 individual teams, ironically enough, the Columbus Blue Jackets amongst them. But 6 individual teams, I believe it's Columbus, Tampa, Anaheim, Chicago. I'll have to look up the other 2, but I know those 4 for sure are
I think Carolina.
Carolina might be one too, yeah. And then, but those teams have individual deals with BioSteel as well. So they will be creditors too that are owed money as this all gets sorted out. So we're talking about revenue stream for 6 additional teams that obviously goes into that hockey-related revenue. On top of that, now this part won't go into hockey-related revenue, but it does impact some player bottom lines. Now we've heard Connor McDavid's deal has expired, which is interesting, but so let's assume it has expired. But BioSteel did sign Connor Bedard to a multi-year deal. I know that I've heard that at this point in his career, Bedard is probably, and by landing in Chicago, he's probably I had someone tell me that it was probably, he's probably close to the $500,000 valuation of a deal. To get like Connor Bedard's likeness on your product, you're probably paying like $500,000. McDavid's about double that. So if we can assume that McDavid had $1 million deal, and I'm being clear. I don't know that for sure. I've talked to people who work in the marketing space who have kind of spaced this out for me. So we're looking at a number of players. So if you look at the players who have been BioSteel athletes and they've been used to promote their product, you're looking at all of a sudden McDavid, Bedard, some other guys who are also going to be creditors. This BioSteel thing's going to have a financial impact on the whole league. On top of that, it's going to be interesting to see. There's also a logistical perspective now of you got a company going to bankruptcy protection, and you're a trainer who has to get product for your team for training camp. Technically, you still have to use BioSteel, especially if you're one of those teams that signed the promotional deal. So now all of a sudden, it's not like you can run to Costco and pick up a big crate of Gatorade. You're breaking a contract. So it's the whole BioSteel thing is the jokes on Twitter. It's been fun to make them. You talk about that, but this has a bigger implication than I think people realize. And I'm really fascinated to see where it goes, because the bankruptcy protection in theory could make the NHL whole this year. It could make those teams whole, but long term, you look at the parent company for BioSteel, it's also struggling. Long term, we're going to be in a spot where, using my own kind of back of paper math, trying to figure it out, the NHL is going to need to re-find a deal with Gatorade or Powerade again or something like that, because it's hard to see how BioSteel comes back from this after all of that. So hopefully that all makes sense, Prashanth. I'll let you now kind of get me back on track here, but that's kind of it. I just figured it was worth talking about because it's an NHL story right now that's important, but it's kind of the whole scope of it's been kind of missed, I think, in just tweets and side notes and everything.
Yeah, so basically, if I, to try and summarize for everybody listening, so BioSteel, obviously they're the official energy drink of the NHL. Then in January 2023, they enter into the multi-year partnerships, which I think is important to state, with 6 different teams, Anaheim, Carolina, Chicago, Columbus, Pittsburgh, and Tampa are the 6 teams that have those multi-year partnerships. During this time, PepsiCo, which is the parent company for Gatorade, they allowed the Gatorade deal to end at the end of last year. And so now where all of this ends up being a problem is, this deal with BioSteel was supposed to go directly to hockey-related revenue. And hockey-related revenue is split 50-50 between the players and the general managers on that side. And so, I shouldn't say general managers, the owners, the teams. And so the concern is that we've been waiting for the players to repay their debt before the salary cap can really start to take off. The debt being that accrued during the COVID pandemic. So now by not potentially having this money or not potentially having, that kind of financial support, how does that impact the potential for that debt to be repaid as soon as this year, as a lot of people are expecting, as well as how does that impact the future projected rise, which, as we were talking about back in June of 2023 in Joe Smith's article, looking at this for The Athletic, there was an expectation that the cap would go up 10 to 12 million in the next 2 to 3 years. And, how much does this impact that? I don't know that I can say that. I don't know if you have a better idea of that, but that's certainly a source of concern that I have.
Yeah, I don't think it will stop paying off the debt. I think the other parts of the NHL business have been humming along much better than expected. As much as we all hate how many sports gambling ads we see, just truthfully, sports gambling has been a boon for the NHL bottom line. There's some markets like Texas, for example, where once Texas legalizes sports gambling, there are partners that are just chomping at the bit to partner with the Dallas Stars, for example, once it's legalized to gamble there. So it's not going to, I don't think it's going to stop the cap from unflattening. Where it comes down to the issue is it's more so, how much does it impact the rise? Because all of a sudden, if you're not getting, let's say it's 20 million and you add some team deals, let's say all of a sudden, I'm ballparking, let's just say you lost $25 million. You lose $25 million, that's still $25 million lost. I know it's a big, big business, but it's still $25 million lost that you now have to replace. The other thing, and it's just kind of where it allows you to be more of a curmudgeon about this, to the NHL and the NHLPA, and we'll give Marty Walsh a pass on this because this was not a deal that Marty Walsh negotiated. This was under the prior deal. Where was your background work? Just that's the other fair question to ask right now of what was your viability of the background work? Did you go through and when you looked at the business of this, was BioSteel really a smart bet? I don't know the answer to that, but it at least has opened the NHL up to that question. You didn't see the NFL partner with BioSteel as a big company. Patrick Mahomes is one of the big investors in the NFL didn't partner with BioSteel. You didn't see the NBA do it. You saw the NHL was trying to be a little bit on their own, and they tried to go against the tried and true and everything like that. And on one hand, you can give a little bit of credit for trying to be the lead dog for a product. But at the end of the day, maybe there's a reason that the NFL and the NBA, the economic standards for sports in North America, didn't partner with them in those ways. But the NHL has opened themselves up to those questions. Moral of the story is it's not going to be the reason. It'll keep the cap down a little bit. It's not going to stop the cap from unflattening. It's not that type of crisis, but it is something that we should be talking about.
Yeah, without a doubt. And to put it in context, I think at the end of the 2021-2022 season, hockey related revenue was north of $5 billion for the NHL. And so just kind of putting that in perspective, like you said, this deal won't necessarily be the thing that breaks a $10 to $12 million rise, but it is revenue that does need to be replaced along with the fallout from each of the 6 individual teams, the different players that are sponsors and whatnot, having to deal with this. And so it is an interesting story that I'm interested to see how it plays out over the next year. And, Sean, you've been on top of this for more than a year. I mean, you wrote about this back in June of 2022. And so, for folks looking for a little bit more background, you can check out Sean's, prior article. It's housed on The Athletic. but talking about the BioSteel partnership and kind of what the projections we're looking for. So, make sure you get all your details there. And, if you'd like to support our show, please subscribe to the Wing Wheel Podcast on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Wingwheel Podcast. By subscribing, you're not only unlocking more great benefits like Wing Wheel Podcast exclusive Discord, which has an Expected by Whom channel, bonus episodes, and more. You're also supporting us as we're a part of the Wing Wheel Podcast Content Network. All right, we're going to shift gears once again and go into our feature interview for today's show. And so today we're pleased to welcome Director of Hockey Analytics for the Boston Bruins, Jeremy Rogalski. And so without further ado, let's get into it. All right, folks, joining us today, we've got another very exciting guest, the Director of Hockey Analytics for the Boston Bruins, Jeremy Rogalski. Jeremy, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. Certainly, I've enjoyed listening so far, and happy to step into the hot seat for a few minutes here.
It is quite the hot seat. We prepped Jeremy with kind of what we're going to be throwing at him, and we did an impressive amount of research to get ready for this one today. And so, I think we gotta get started all the way back where everything kicked off. We won't go back to the academy days. We'll just go back to Bates College and talk a little bit about kind of how you decided you wanted to work in hockey. You've got an economics background from Bates and then worked a little bit with the Patriots, but what kind of prompted you to pursue a role in hockey?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, it's becoming more popular today, but I guess first of all, I grew up in Massachusetts. So, big Boston sports fan coming up. Like a lot of your guests, played at a very low level and was fortunate enough to do it all the way through school. So golf and hockey were sort of my two mainstays, but, I was just kind of a sports stats junkie. My parents would tell me since I was 4. So it was something that was always kind of in me, but, probably in high school, Theo Epstein was able to take the Red Sox to the World Series for me. And that was sort of my moment to say, okay, like that's really cool. It's something that could be attainable. Seeing somebody who hadn't played the sport, work their way up to such a prominent position. So, it's funny, like back then I wouldn't say analytics was my target. I didn't really know, as much about it. It wasn't as publicized until Moneyball came out that there was sort of this niche there. So, for me, I went to school, obviously wanting to play sports, but, economics seems like a good path. I thought strict math might not have been exactly my thing. So, economics was a good opportunity to keep things pretty broad. And, from there, we, I guess really the way I was able to show my interest in sports, I sought out those internships you referenced, which both actually happened to not be in hockey. So it was a good opportunity, though, to gain experience and find out some things about some sports that maybe I didn't know so much about. And I had to write a paper, actually, at Bates. So there weren't, back then there weren't as many sports analytics focused classes, but I think on my third try, I was able to find a professor that allowed me to do a thesis on hockey. So I wrote a 60 to 80 page research paper on the salary cap because it had come out, it had been implemented about 5 years before I graduated. So I had a little bit of data to work with, and, that was my way to express interest in, pursuing sports as a career. So certainly thank you to that professor, and off we went.
So was that paper, was that part of, was this, help us on the timeline real quick, was that part of when you're applying for the internship with the Patriots, because you worked in the football space? Did you send a salary cap paper as part of your application to a hockey salary cap paper to try to get the job with the Patriots? Help me on the timeline with that real quick here.
Yeah, for sure. No, so it was, that was my senior year. So that was when I was looking for a job. I was desperate. I sent my resume to every team, literally, in football and baseball and in hockey. I didn't know as much about basketball, so I didn't really see a path there. But, so that was sort of, I was hanging a bit on that my senior year. But, as an undergrad, I was looking for opportunities. So my first one was with, it was with both the soccer and football team out of Foxborough. So, doing things like managing the mascot and helping with player appearances and working on game days and things like that. Nothing crazy, but again, it was just a good way to get a look into the world of sports. So that was sort of the first one. And then, I followed that up and I worked in the football ops department for a summer with the Patriots. Again, like back then it was paper playbooks. So put together the paper playbook for the preseason game or, make sure, drive the rookies from the hotel to to the stadium for practice days, things like that. So it's nothing, again, you're just building trust, but it's really cool to see kind of inside the operation and the culture and everything, with teams like that. And then obviously, have that knowledge and information and certainly references as well as you try to move up in the sports world.
So you mentioned that kind of sports analytics, or at least an analytic focused role, wasn't necessarily your intention with when you got into sports. And so I want to talk a little bit about your journey through different roles within the Bruins organization. Because for those that don't know, Jeremy joined the Bruins back in 2009 just as an assistant to hockey administration, and then became a video analyst, did that for a few years, then a hockey ops assistant, and then 2017 named director of hockey analytics. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how your responsibilities differed, in each of those roles, and kind of what skills you acquired that ultimately prepared you to kind of seek the director of hockey analytics role?
Yeah, for sure. So, and honestly, that's been one of my favorite things I think about my time with the Bruins is just the different exposure. It's been a very, nonlinear path. And I think each of those stops, the knowledge gain there really has helped prepare me for what I'm doing now. And it's something I don't know that, it might be a little unique. I don't want to speak for the whole league, but, so I started out, the first role was really just an internship. So I was driving out from Western Mass to Boston 3 days a week, working primarily for a guy named Ryan Nadeau who runs our draft now. So he was doing more college free agency, team travel, things like that back then. So I was sort of supporting that, but it was pretty cool to step in. That was the 2010 draft. So we took Tyler Seguin in the first round at 2 overall. And I was cutting, there weren't as many platforms that could deliver shifts as there are now. So I was cutting shifts basically for sort of that draft class. And I did a whole bunch we had a second first round pick, but I think we ended up trading it. But it was pretty cool just to be able to watch Hall and Seguin and sort of, form my own opinion, whatever that was back then. Not that it, was kind of an automatic anyway. It was going to happen at number 2, but it really was kind of just an eye opener in general as to everything that goes into a hockey operation, because you really have no idea until you sort of step in all the little travel nuances and all that sort of stuff. So, after that year, our video coordinator left, moved on to a different role. Fortunately stayed on for a bit and helped, train me to take on that job. Cause again, I had never traveled with the team. I didn't really know everything that went into that role. So, survived, I guess, and was able to work with the coaching staff for 5 years. Again, we won the cup in my first year. So that was kind of shocking to step in and have that opportunity and to have no idea what to do with it. So I was able to work for the coaching staff for 5 years. Similar, I think Matt spoke to that as well on an earlier podcast. Like it's great to see the ins and outs and the day to day for that group and, learn what they're interested in and learn about, whether it's the pre-scout component or charting scoring chances after a game, things like that. It was just a great learning experience. For me, obviously working on the hockey ops side was something I was more passionate about long term. So, Don Sweeney obviously moved in the general manager role and I had worked closely with him. One of the nice things again was they allowed me to sit in on scouting meetings, for example, at times when the schedule fit while I was doing the video role, as long as it didn't interfere and obviously, don't communicate anything out of it. So, it was nice to have some trust already, with that group and internal knowledge to be able to now come into scouting meetings and say, okay, I know kind of how these work and, what are some opportunities to, to work in them and complement them from that perspective. So, I pivoted. Ryan was our director of analytics at that time, I believe. Eventually, obviously, he pivoted into more of a scouting role, but, probably more day to day. Like I was doing the reporting to our coaching group from an analytic perspective and player research and things like that. The other cool thing about that role was I was able to be sort of the secondary scout for the U.S. for those 2 years. So I was traveling out to the USHL and Minnesota high school, and now I understand why everybody's so excited about Marriott points and, having their airline memberships and everything. Certainly that's a good benefit. So, trying to make sure your car is going to start leaving a Minnesota high school game at 9 p.m. a real victory. So I certainly enjoyed that experience. And then, just to shortcut it, obviously after 2 years, the analytics title was formalized, and we've been working in that lane ever since.
So what are in that role now? It's a role that's now, this is what, six years. So we talked about not being great at math here. I'm worst at math here. About 6 years now. As the director of hockey analytics now, kind of what are your roles and responsibilities like within the organization now?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, I guess first thing I'll get the sacrilege right out of the way. I wasn't ever formally trained in computer or data science, right? You can see it in the path. Getting an economics degree in 2009, there wasn't really a path to, again, maybe the platforms have also become more popular since then, but, when we were doing econometrics, I was not doing it in R. I was certainly doing it in Excel. So, apologies for that, but, I don't think it's a real necessity for sort of my role today. We've kind of been building up our group over time. So I manage a group of 4 others, obviously, and, each has a little bit of a different role. Adds unique value to our group, which is great. Certainly it's been phenomenal to have the support of Cam and Donnie and ownership to invest in our group, and hopefully validate everything we're doing. But for me, I guess I'm really focused on integration. So, we talk about the path I had, and that's been the biggest benefit for me is, we have a different head coach now, obviously, but, a lot of that staff I worked with. So you're taking the knowledge you learned in that role previously, understanding where the gaps may be and where there might be some opportunity or where there might be some desire for more information and just building on that. So a lot of what I do is communication. Whether it's, again, our amateur scouting director comes from an analytic background. So what can you provide? And don't wait till meetings. Like, let's make sure we're talking, all throughout the year and making sure everybody's getting seen that needs to be seen. And if there's discrepancies, let's, ask the questions. Let's make sure we're all, on the same page rather than pulling out surprises in meetings. So yeah, it's sort of managing the integration piece and, making sure that all the super secret models and tools we're building are hitting the mark for the most part.
Kind of following up, you mentioned you guys have a scouting director with an analytical background. And I'm curious now, we went out of our way to have a USHL coach on this show so we could kind of get an idea.
Former video guy too.
Yes. So for what you can share, what are kind of the challenges when it comes to working with that department? Because obviously it is trying to compare a kid in the USHL versus the KHL versus the Q and everything like that. So from what you can speak to and keeping the cool models hidden and everything like that, what are some of the challenges that you work with your amateur scouting report to kind of tackle on that front there?
Yeah, for sure. The first one's easy. The data is not the same at every level, right? There's certain leagues that we're just blind on, whether we just have production. Honestly, somebody else might say this at some point too, like heights and weights aren't guaranteed either. So I might be looking at a guy and Elite Prospects has him at 5'9", but then I go read our report in RinkNet and it's like, oh, he's actually 6'2". Okay. Well, that completely changes the way I'm, analyzing the player, obviously. So, context is such a big thing, right? We talk a lot about that. And again, that can go in a lot of different directions. What's the quality of the league they're playing in? What's the quality of the situation they're playing in their lineup? Youngstown was a stacked team. So a kid playing on the third line in Youngstown, for example, you might need to evaluate that a little differently than a kid on a first line somewhere else. So, certainly there's contextual bits, but it's across the board, right? There's, whether it's player background or, the physical projection, the skating projection. There's so many little boxes that you kind of have to check and reconcile against each other, as you're making a decision. But, I think it's our job to just kind of ask as many questions along the way, ultimately you have to stop asking questions and make a decision. But, part of the job is not just evaluating data. It's trying to put together all the pieces to get to that decision and what are our blind spots in this decision. So, if there's a player we really like that has fantastic, data triggers popping out to us, and we've had some intrigue in the reports, but we're concerned about this one thing, you got to bring it up and discuss it. And if it's a resolvable problem that just requires a little bit of player background or an evaluation by, our goaltending or skating department or something, then, let's talk about that.
I am at least glad to hear that you guys have the same frustration with the heights and weights for players. Because let me tell you, I've probably done the most amount of work, at least on the public sphere, with what I have access to publicly in the prospect space. And it is the most frustrating thing in the world to see how much this stuff differs, even from different sources, between what the team has, the league has, the central scouting has, elite prospects has. It's absolutely crazy. In fact, I think the Ducks' new analyst, Connor Jung, once wrote a paper on if you could project how a player would grow based on the numbers that were publicly available. So it's definitely one of the most frustrating things for anybody out there working on prospect work.
I do have a quick elite prospects aside, since I do some contract work with their editorial side, EP Rink side. One of the great emails they sometimes get, and this was in the company, maybe I'm giving away a state secret from elite prospects that I shouldn't be, but a couple of weeks back, there was an email to someone to elite prospects asking to have their elite prospects page taken down because the guy was trying to play beer league in a C league. And his elite prospects page was outing him as too good of a player to play in that league, and that the league kept using that as evidence of, you can't play in this league. You played Division III college hockey. So there is just an elite prospects aside. Let's
Well, no, that's come up. I definitely, some of my group definitely, play the morning leagues too. And every now and then you'll see a jersey on somebody else, I guess. And you're like, no, you should not be here. That's not okay. So totally get it.
We, Max Boltman, or the good friend of ours and good friend of the show, I think. We never had Max on, but Prashanth and I can say he's a good friend. He could tell stories about our Wednesday night beer league team here in the Detroit area, where we've played against some kids who definitely were way better than the league we should be than we're playing in. So, anywho, back to actual NHL people and people who have real elite prospects page. Bruce Cassidy a couple of years back said, he said this publicly in an interview, so I'm not giving away any state secrets. He said basically one of his views on coaching started changing with analytics data available to him. And he talked about defending the blue line more aggressively and challenging controls entries more aggressively. So thanks to some evidence from analytics. And so I wanted to ask you, A, do you remember that conversation? If there's anything more you can give us on that. And B, how does that kind of reflect how a coaching staff and an analytics staff work together?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of layers to it, right? There's, it was great working with Butch for such a long time because he was very open to it. Certainly there were times where, the data didn't align with the perspective of the game, and we had to certainly work through, why that might have happened. A lot of times it was probably just, data or event inaccuracies, that we were receiving from providers and things like that. And you go back, you work through it, it gets corrected, and it's no big deal. But, obviously, there's simple wins, right? There's, there's game performance, right? There's, what do I care about in game performance? So I know after a game I know you guys talked about this earlier, there's cohesion with the video staff. I know what they're going to produce. I know what they're going to do, better than us. I know what they don't have and where we can sort of complement and add layers to that story. And similarly from a pregame perspective, like, what they're looking for in video and whether or not, the overall team profile we can provide can complement that as well. So, time's of the essence for those guys. The games they fly so fast, and, it needs to be a clean handoff of that information. So, I think there's simple wins on game performance. Lines pair stuff is always interesting because, that's not something that maybe is as evident, in a post-game report or in that data. So whether it's, something tactical where what's the other team going to throw at us, or is there a particular line that's been together for 5 games and, they're really clicking, you guys got to be aware that might be a stronger matchup for us. That's stuff that might not pop through the system work in the video and things like that. So, certainly there's simple wins like that. And then, to your point, Sean, there's certain things that they're curious about that they're going to bring to us as well. So whether it's, it starts with a question, hopefully on their side, I believe there's a lot of value in this thing. Is it true? How do you define this thing? What constitutes a blue line defense? What do you do if it happens between the red line and the blue line? That's not really an entry yet that's been denied, but we need to make sure we're properly evaluating that. So those are, some of the types of conversations, I think Butch noted at one point in that too. Obviously there's things we try to create and bring to the coaching group as well, because we think they might value it. And, there's a certain hit rate on that, obviously, but, I think understanding, we sit with the coaches before the year. We just did a couple of days ago and they sort of work through their system, and it gives us a ton of ideas like, oh, you value this thing. Can we go sort of provide some context to that?
What was it like kind of building, we talked about obviously the prior coach, but the current coach, Jim Montgomery, what was it kind of like building that relationship with him as you're coming? It's the first time you've already been in your role when a coach comes to meet you. It's not from your perspective. If I have my timing correctly, obviously you would have moved into your role when Cassidy was already there. This time you're already in this role and a new coach is coming to work with you. So what was it like kind of building that relationship with Jim Montgomery? I imagine, and it's obviously always evolving, but before last season and before this season, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's been interesting, actually. So for me, the timeline, Claude was our head coach when I was the video guy and was still the head coach when I pivoted. Bruce was in Providence. So, now there is AHL data available through our providers, but, back then there wasn't. So eventually he moved on to the NHL bench as an assistant. That was probably where he got his first snapshot of, really the data we were able to provide. I don't think we had it when he was in Providence. So, that was his first exposure. But what I'm finding now, and it's actually really cool, I had this conversation with somebody at the rookie tournament, was people are changing staffs now. Monty was obviously in Dallas, and you're not introducing them to analytics anymore. It's not like we're necessarily going to trade state secrets, tell me everything this other team's doing, but you're not educating them on this concept of data anymore. They're coming with, some introduction to it. Each group might be able to provide different things or have different, skill sets within their group to be able to complement it. But Monty knows what analytics are, what data is. He has things he, obviously believes in. He has to learn what our resources are, obviously, and we have to learn sort of how to complement his needs as well. But, certainly we're not starting from day one in terms of introducing him to all this type of stuff. So he has things he wants already coming in the door, and then we can sort of say, okay, what do you think about these things we've been doing? Do they have value to you or not? So, the conversation's definitely changed, and I think that applies, we've had changes in our other groups too on the scouting side, and it's very similar. So, we actually brought an amateur scout over from Seattle, and I know Seattle's going to come up later on this conversation. I was sure to grill him, to compare notes on what I could find out. So.
For sure. And, one of the things you kind of alluded to there is kind of how data has changed in terms of what's available, over your time. And so now you're kind of one of the longest standing, I guess, employees of an NHL organization, coming up on almost 15 years now. I just wanted to get kind of your historical perspective on how you've seen, the incorporation of data change over those years. You mentioned, at least with coaches now, it's like you're no longer introducing them to the concept. They're coming in expecting to see that. So kind of, if you can give us a little bit of that historical perspective from your time in Boston.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changed a lot. I mean, certainly the growth of event data has been a big thing because I think, back then there were just simple logical wins to be had that, little identifiers that, you felt could lead you to good hockey players. How they were good hockey players, other than watching, you might not have the context to point to, but simple wins back then, like drafting productive hockey players, would have been a good strategy. And 15 years ago, you're probably going to increase your hit rate just by doing something like that. But now we just have so much more detail, and it probably makes you more convicted too, and standing behind your what you're pointing to. If there's a kid who's got 60 points in a draft league, he's probably going to get drafted, but now you've got this whole context about how he accomplishes it and what the holes might be in his game, that it just changes the conversation you have with a coaching or scouting group. And, we still have work to do on, getting a little deeper beyond that. We're not getting the full picture, but, it just changes the conversation you're able to have with this, the scouts and the coaches. And again, you probably feel a little more confident in the assessment you're providing.
So we've had and on this we've had people from other organizations who have gone through the video coach route and everything like that. I actually know from my time in Dallas, I know Sean Andrake, who works on the video staff there for you guys. We talked about kind of the coach and understanding this. I'm curious, and with your experience in working with video as well, what's been the evolution like of using the video to connect how these tools can apply to players? I'm curious because we always hear about coaches use it and everything like that. And I'm curious of what type of experiences you might have had trying to show and tell the data to connect it with with players and things along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. I think primarily we still use the coaching group as that conduit, right? It's probably a little more convincing and the delivery is a little cleaner coming from a coach. But I think a lot of times, whether there's been an identifier in a player's play or, from the data, certainly there's a conversation to be had with whoever's responsible for that area and say, are you seeing these things? And, or conversely, a coach might say, hey, I'm having a real hard time with this, this particular area. Is there anything that you have that would sort of help me, support the messaging or, whatever I'm hoping to accomplish there. And I should pause, actually. It's funny because I find whenever we head in that direction, it's always a default to go to a negative or an improvement, which I hate. I like using analytics for a positive purpose too, but I feel like unfortunately a lot of times the reinforcement tends to be from a negative perspective. So, that's something I'm trying to change around the office a bit, that we're not just the correctors that, when you're playing really well too, I can certainly, this is what you're doing really well. But I think again, the message probably gets delivered in that fashion, but, whether it's maybe we have events that help the coaches find that video quicker rather than having to comb through every, shift of a player's game, to find those particular moments. So that's where the video can help complement the data. Or a specific request, an obvious one is heat maps, right? Like if we have a struggle with a player who was getting inside, he was scoring, now he's not, we don't think it's because he's not getting the puck there. We think it's because of his roots or his unwillingness to go there. We can help with that. So, it's again, it all comes back to the conversation and the hope that there's sort of a question or an inquiry coming our way.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that you guys have, launched. I think this is now year 3 of it. It's kind of being a pioneer in this space, but your diversity and inclusion scouting mentorship program. I know you have a little bit of involvement in that. Can you just speak a little bit about what the program is, kind of what it's hoping to accomplish? And I know we're past the point of accepting applicants for this season, but kind of talking just a little bit about, what people get out of it.
For sure. Yeah. So it's, we're in our 3rd season of the mentorship. I think you noted earlier, like we're one of the first teams in hockey to do something like this. I know there's a couple other teams who did something simultaneous or shortly thereafter, which is obviously awesome to see. But, we can't take full credit. There was a team in another league that did something like that, and we read an article on it, and we just thought, what a fantastic opportunity, right? At a time in the game that we're really trying to bring different perspectives in, or people who just haven't had the same level of access to, to get an opportunity with an organization or to see their full potential. So, we did a little research, planned it out for about a year, and 3 years ago we started on our first journey. We had a big group too, actually. The first year, I think we had maybe like 12 people accepted into the program. And, it's been phenomenal, honestly, as we're really excited about hopefully being able to help, people gain exposure to be able to advance their careers, and add skill sets that, they're really seeking. But, we've met some unbelievable people along the way too. For us, the obvious example now is Danielle Marmer, who just killed the draft yesterday, we think, for PWHL Boston. Obviously, it's been phenomenal to see her take, everything she learned not to do from us and turn it into a positive impact for that team. But, there's just so many different people that have great stories and different perspectives and ask phenomenal questions. And we're starting to see, people from our first year who are starting to make, career advancements, whether it's from an assistant coach position to a head coach position, or, gain a scouting opportunity with an organization. And, we certainly can't take credit for it. They've obviously done it on their own merit, but hopefully they've learned a little something from us along the way. And, again, for us, I just want to say it's been every bit as beneficial, on our end of things as well.
So I have two follow-ups on this. One, give us the 30-second elevator pitch of what the day-to-day is like that. We hear mentorship program, and that can mean various things. So I'm just curious of kind of what when someone's in the program and everything like that, let's kind of give the quick what it involves and things like that. And then two, just I'm curious, as someone who grew up a Boston sports fan, as you said earlier, now there's you mentioned the PWHL draft the other day. I'm curious of how much is it nice for you to be able to sit back and maybe watch another Boston hockey team that doesn't impact your livelihood at the end of the day. So
Yeah, well, and especially we were talking about it yesterday. I mean, we want everybody to succeed. We're certainly hopeful the Red Sox and Patriots turn it around here soon as well, because I think, we were spoiled for a while there, but when everybody's competitive, it's obviously good for the city as well. So, so the mentorship program, I probably can't do it in 30 seconds, but, you're paired with somebody from our staff, assistant general manager, amateur scout, pro scout. We try to change the pairings too, so our mentors get a little different look and perspective too. So, we, every month we sort of do some video work with them. Again, that's a direct mentor-mentee relationship with somebody on our staff. So you're paired with somebody the whole time. And then we provide group opportunities too. So whether it's, an office hours come on, every other month, and, a lot of the mentees are actually really interested in getting to know each other as well. So, that's something where we've adapted, and they want to hear more about each other and their stories, and also just to sort of talk hockey with people that have different perspectives. So we have people who have been coaching at a high school level. We have somebody who's been scouting somewhere for a CHL team. Like, those are interesting conversations to see play out as well. And then we try to make it a holistic experience. So we'll have what we call town halls as well. So we'll bring on people in industry, from similar backgrounds who, whether they're on the agent side or whether we do an analytics month actually too, because a lot of people are interested in learning about data, and how that applies to scouting. So we kind of try to give a little peek at the whole hockey operation, in addition to just kind of, going through scouting. The scouting is focused on different levels, right? There's pro, there's draft, there's free agency, things like that. So, not quite 30 seconds, but that's sort of the experience, to overview that. To answer your second question. Yeah. I mean, I think, it was really cool. I think it was last year the guys had their Boston Pride jersey day. I want to say they wore the jerseys to the rink to support the local team last year. And, I did have a good opportunity to chat with Colleen Coyne back then, who was running the Pride as well. And, it's been great to see them have a lot of success, and I don't think our level of support, it's probably only going to increase because of the relationship with Marms. So we're definitely, we've talked about showing up a little rowdy to whenever their opening day is in January as a staff. So hopefully we can do that. And, hopefully they have the season they're hoping for.
All right, you alluded to the Seattle question, so here's kind of a slightly related Seattle question. As an Bates alum, you have a fellow Stanley Cup champion who's also a Bates alum in Timo Hashi. I want to make sure I pronounce Tim's name. I should have looked up the pronunciation. Make sure I made it. But Tim's now video coach of Seattle, won a Stanley Cup with Washington. He mentioned publicly, actually, about how your day with the Cup, your influence on him really helped his career. And I'm curious for you now, what's that kind of mean when you hear that? When you hear you kind of have that impact on someone and to kind of see a fellow alum and he was at your Cup day. What's that like to hear and see?
Yeah, I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate to get to, things to fall into place for me to get to where I am today. And, it is pretty unbelievable. I know there's a football school like this too, where, there's like a D3 school that a bunch of head coaches, NFL head coaches have come from. But like for a Division 3 hockey school that only had, or Division 3 school that only has club hockey, for two of us to be in the league is pretty incredible. So, Timmy's a good friend. Obviously we're competitive now, but, a lot of credit goes to him, to be honest. Like I think he ended up pivoting and doing grad school at Brown at some point. And I used to go to games down there for, watching obviously the ECAC hockey. And, he was persistent. He stuck around and wanted to ask a lot of questions about, what I do and how to get in the door and all that. So he's worked every bit as hard to get to where he is today. He gives me a lot of credit, I know, but, for him to get his foot in the door with Washington and get the opportunity he did, a lot of the credit goes his way, as well. So, I don't really know what else to say about that, but I'm just thrilled that he's in the league with me and, we're still friends, but obviously Seattle gave us a hard time last year and I'd like to give it back to them this year. So.
All right, we got one last one for you before we can let you off the hot seat. This one is probably the toughest question you're going to have to answer on the show today. You were varsity golf at Bates. I know you mentioned you haven't played all that much recently, but what's the handicap now? And give me kind of an organizational power ranking of the golfers in Boston.
Oh, I know. It's embarrassing, to be honest. I played twice this summer. I played once last year. So honestly, just finding the fairways a victory for me. And sometimes it just, I need to take the 4-iron off the tee just to feel good about my game. But it's one thing I'm really disappointed about in our hiring is we brought a lot of scratch handicaps into the mix now, so that I just can't have quite the same conversation. So the real question for me, I know we have our assistant general manager, Jamie Langenbrunner's close to a scratch, and we have a scout who just moved to Minnesota, Parker McKay, who's also close to a scratch. And I know they had a team match, I think, but I think they're probably the two closest in our group. I'm very curious to keep an eye on that battle and see what happens. For me, I'm probably at least a 12, if not higher at this point, just because I don't play nearly enough. So I'm great in a scramble if you're looking for a partner, but not on the gross basis, no.
That's one thing we need to get going is across the league, just start getting an organizational scramble match going and just seeing how that plays out. Get folks from the different hockey ops departments.
The expected by whom scramble coming to a day after a draft near you, right?
That would be awesome. I would do that. Yeah. I don't know any other golfers in my lane there, so if you find some, please let me know. I'd be happy to do it. So.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely let you know. But Jeremy, just want to say we appreciate your time today. Thank you for hopping on, sitting on the hot seat for us. You got anything that you want to turn back our way? I know you mentioned that.
I did actually. Yeah. I think we talked about it earlier. I liked Sam throwing it back at you guys. And it's a better conversation too, to be honest. You guys have thoughts and perspective. So, Sam made a comment on the last podcast about the differences between public and private data. So I'm curious for you guys, any level, right? We talked about draft today. We talked about pro. You mentioned your frustrations with heights and weights, but what's one thing, I guess, maybe that you want to know more about that you can't really answer right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tremendous question. I'll kind of give a brief background on kind of what I've at least been exposed to for everybody listening. So I do everything from the public space. So with at least prospect work, I'll scrape directly from the league websites. So you're only really able to get what the league has. So, for those that have spent any time looking at Canadian Hockey League data, the WHL gives you nothing. The Q and the O at least gives you, a little bit more data, although it appears to be a little more locked down now. The USHL has even less than that. So trying to find a common ground across leagues is such a challenge when you're working in that space. So in the prospect space, one of the things I would just love is just to have standardization of data across all the leagues. Like, I'd love to have access to, it doesn't even have to necessarily be NHL quality public data, which is decent for public work. If you can at least give me just what the Q and the O provide, which is shot coordinates, who's on the ice, who's off the ice, strength situations. So I can get some better semblance of what I'm working with. That's definitely a big plus. And then I've had the chance to look behind the curtain a bit, for those that are familiar with like Instat and Sport Contract, I've looked at a little bit deeper and seen kind of what those leagues do. Or those organizations do. And it's very, very neat stuff. I think for me though, going back to your original question, if there's one thing I wish I could better understand, it would be just better understanding like how all of these different microstats ultimately influence a player's contributions. We talk about tracking entries, tracking exits, board battles, puck battles, and whatnot. And at some point, you say, is it worth collecting the data just to have data if the data isn't actually helping you do something with it? But the challenge has always been tying that granular data back to bigger outcomes. And that's the piece we don't have enough information to do, or at least I'm not skilled. I should speak for myself. I'm not skilled enough to do enough with what I have publicly available. And so that's kind of where I'd like to learn a little bit more.
Kind of following up on that, I have more so, and it still impacts prospects, but it's more at the pro level. I would love to see one of my biggest complaints has always been the lack of any standardized data in the arguably second best league in the world, in the AHL. The fact that to get time on ice, I have to go to Instat. The fact that something as simple as time on ice isn't even in that. There's things where I think I've always believed that if the AHL had slightly better standardized data, we could then start to use that to force other leagues to standardize things. That's been my big thing. And then the thing that I've always been fascinated about, that there's no way for it, the amount of hand tracking it would take for someone in the public sector, and it would just take forever, and this comes from someone who played goalie, still attempts to play goalie. I've always been curious to be able to quantify goalie puck handling, because it's always been a space to me where we always hear and we always see, it's easy for the fan to see the highlight of the giveaway. It's always say the highlight of the giveaway and be like, oh, he should stay in his crease. He should always stay in his crease. And then anecdotally, as someone who watches a goalie play quite a bit, you'd be like, well, no, you missed the all the times they did this, or the stopping the rim in and the handoff to the defenseman. I'd love to be able to just like, I want that data point. I want to be able to be like, look, people who yell at me about this goalie should never leave the net to play the puck. Look, when he's in net, he reduces opponent zone time by this much, or he reduces controlled exits go up this much. Those are the type of things that's the type of thing that I don't think I'll ever be able to get publicly, because it would take me years of my life just to sit and watch little goalie handles behind the blue line. And I've accepted I'll never get it publicly, but hopefully someday it'll be out there. But
yeah, that's a good list. No, I mean, I'm glad, obviously, to the first point, it makes me jealous that, in baseball, they have all the minor league systems, all the high school stadiums where prospects are. Like, there's so much data available at that level, which is, obviously a step beyond what we're talking about there, but, that's where I get a little data envy to be able to have that much clarity at those levels. And then Sean, to your point, you missed an obvious opportunity there though. Like we preach goal scoring in our goaltending group. So obviously that's, that's the pinnacle of puck handling right there. Again, you're talking about mistakes, but we obviously, Linus had a moment of triumph there.
We got to be clear. That was one of the, I'm sure that's one of those moments for you. I hope you guys have like the video of like your coaches watching that play, because it's a 3-2 game. There's three Canucks right on the dot, and he goes for the high flip over that. You talk about turning the low percentage play into the ultimate like reward. Like I would love to see the coaches cam of watching their faces go from pure fear to joy on that play. So
well, and I think the conversation in the room afterwards, because like you said, there's the what ifs, right?
Yeah.
What if, using the golf term, what if you shank that or flub it, and then all of a sudden it changes? But no, obviously that was an exciting moment, and I was at home for that one, obviously, because we were on the road. But yeah, what a cool thing. So.
Cool. Well, Jeremy, greatly appreciate your time today. Again, folks, that's Director of Hockey Analytics for the Boston Bruins, Jeremy Rogalski. Can't thank you enough for taking the time, and hopefully we can bug you a little bit more down the road to potentially hop back on as the season goes on.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to be here, and I'll certainly be continuing to listen as well in future weeks.
And you've got the first invite for the Expected by Whom scramble if we ever as we get more people on. So
just don't count me as your anchor. That's all I ask.
Yeah. We'll start building the list and we'll keep you posted. But appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, that was Director of Hockey Analytics for the Boston Bruins, Jeremy Rogalski. Again, can't thank Jeremy enough for taking the time to chat with us. And so, to close this episode out, we know a lot of you are Red Wings fans listening to this and just had to watch the Traverse City Prospect Tournament, where the Red Wings defense was about as effective as, using a tennis racket to catch water, if you will. I think they gave up, Sebastian Cossa in particular really struggled, giving up 13 goals on 54 shots, some of which are definitely not his fault, some of which weren't the greatest of goals to give up. And so I saw a lot of discussion about this online. I know you have as well, but, Cossa's development, he'll be 21 in September. This is his draft plus 3 year. What should we be expecting for typical goalie development? Is this something that should start raising a flag? Or is this kind of along the lines of what we expect to see with goalies, given how unpredictable their development really is?
I think it's a great discussion to have, and Cossa's a great avenue to have it, because I think one of the things we have to acknowledge with Cossa from the beginning was him going at number 15. It probably was a reach. It was a project. The Red Wings took a gamble on it, and I think we have to acknowledge that. That's something that it's best to look at it from that situation. It's not like this was, it's not like at the draft, other teams. It's not like he would have. If Detroit didn't take him at 15, it's not like he would have gone 16. So I think we have to keep that in mind with Cossa. The other thing with goalie development is there is the long run. Like just speaking of a young goalie who has had success. I was to Stars general manager Jim Nill this past weekend in Traverse City, and Nill is very open about how Jake Ottinger is ahead of schedule for a goalie. He's like, Jake Ottinger is at a spot in his career where at his age, normally he should only be just turning pro. He should only be just turning, he should not just turn pro, just turning into an NHL option. Jake Ottinger is ahead of the schedule for being a number one guy. And so, Cossa is only 21. He played last year in the ECHL. And so we have to keep that context in mind. It's also fair, and I think this is important too, it's also fair to be concerned about the Red Wings making a bad bet or making the wrong bet. And it's not that I don't think Cossa is a future NHL goalie. He has time to turn things around. Once again, he's only 21. But the issue is, you look at his play, and once again, another thing, we talk about sample size a lot on the show. This could have been one bad weekend. We have no idea what's going on inside Sebastian Cossa's head during this weekend. It could have just been one bad weekend, and for all we know, he's going to go light it up with Grand Rapids this year. But you look at his season in Toledo, and he was a good goalie in Toledo and everything like that, but some of his bigger flaws in Toledo was he got picked high by ECHL shooters. And you're getting picked high when you're 6'6" or whatever, and you're getting picked high, that's a concern for me. And when ECHL shooters are picking you up there, and now players in prospect tournaments are picking you up there, NHL shooters are going to find those holes too. AHL shooters are going to find those holes. And Cossa has a lot of those things in his game, by my view, that he has a lot of the things you want to teach guys. Like you want to teach the positioning. You want to teach, well, you can't teach size, but those are the things where you're like, hey, I want this. He doesn't have the puck tracking and the quick hands that sometimes, like a lot of times you'll get a guy who will be a raw product. Like the Detroit-Dallas game, he was playing against a goalie by the name of Remy Poirier. I don't think Remy Poirier will ever be a starter in the NHL. I think Remy Poirier will play NHL games because Remy Poirier is a good puck tracker, has really quick hands, but he's 6'2". His footwork needs a little bit of work. He's not going to be consistent enough for the NHL. But he has some of those raw quickness tools that you're like, okay, I can teach him the other things. I just worry with Cossa about kind of, can you teach quick hands? Can you teach the puck tracking? Because he relies so much on the size. It's a fascinating debate about goalie development and where we're going with all of this. And I don't know about you, Prashanth, but to me, and I know you always want to have goalies in the system and everything like that, but to me, it's not a good sign when you look at outside rankings of your system and everything like that, when the guy you took in the first round has already been passed up. Now, I know I actually am a big believer in Trey Augustine, but he's already been passed in the depth chart. When you look at others' organizational depth charts, he's already been passed by Trey Augustine, who's playing at Michigan State this year.
I mean, everything you've said is valid. I think Cossa in particular, I'll step, I think everyone who is familiar with my work knows I'm not a proponent of taking goalies in the first round. I'm not a proponent of trading up. And the Red Wings did both of those things, with respect to drafting Sebastian Cossa. So I'm going to set aside that bias and just kind of talk about his development path so far. So he's had a challenging development path. If we just talk about him in isolation, he went from a stacked WHL Edmonton Oil Kings team, a team that allowed, 20 shots on goal a night, to where he was of largely low danger chances within a very structured system. I mean, we're talking about his draft year. I think he goes, 17-1-1, an absolutely ridiculous season for him. I mean, he's posting a .940 save percentage, going 17-1-1, being 6'6". You can see it. The athleticism is there. The ability to sort of make those desperation saves is there. And so the thought is, hey, if I've got a 6'6" guy that is this athletic, that has the ability to, make those impossible to make saves. And if I can just work on the foot speed, the positioning, how to play the depth, how to move from the post to the, top of the crease, if you can work on those technical aspects, you have yourself a potential, rock star. And this was the case with Jacob Markstrom, back in 2008 when he gets drafted. And so with Cossa, the challenge is he goes from that stacked Edmonton Oil Kings team, and then goes to the AHL in Grand Rapids, where immediately struggles in those 3 games, and then is sent down to Toledo. And we've talked about this with the ECHL, but the ECHL is a very unstructured league. There's a lot of defensive breakdowns. There's a lot of 2-on-1s. There's a lot of breakaways. And so it's a very hard league for a goalie to really get a rhythm and work on the things that consistently work on the things that Cossa struggles with, which, Greg Ballack identified this for EP Rinkside. His biggest concerns right now are he loses his net a lot. His feet aren't quick enough to pass across. and he tends to reach for the puck too much. And those are difficult to work on things in the ECHL, where you have a lot of those 2-on-1s, 3-on-1s, breakaways, non-traditional types of shots. Even prospect tournaments is very unstructured. You're taking a bunch of guys who've never played together, putting them on the ice and asking them to go, and be successful. So I will say all of that in defense of Cossa, while then following it up with, for first round goalies and guys that go in the first round, by the end of their third year out of the draft, so we're talking about by the end of draft plus 3 year, which this is Cossa's draft plus 3 year, you've got over 50% of those goalies having played in the NHL. And so you can officially start saying at the start of next season, if Cossa is not on the NHL roster, that he has now fallen behind the average for what a first-round goalie does. And really, this draft plus 3 years is the big year, because after 2 years, you see about 28% of goalies being ready, going to play their first NHL game. But after 3 years, that number jumps up to 55%. And so that's where this is really the year where you need to see Cossa take big strides forward. You're hoping to see him sticking in the AHL. You're hoping to see his feet starting to move faster. You're hoping to see him be more square to the shot. You're hoping to see him use his size to avoid coming too far out of the net. Depth, you don't have to play all that far out at the top of your crease when you're 6'6". Use your size to your advantage. Those are the things you want to be watching for with Sebastian Cossa. But from a data perspective, he's at risk now, if he doesn't have a strong D+3 year, of falling behind what we expect an average goalie to do. Now, all that being said, he can still get there. We saw this with Jack Campbell, right? Jack Campbell took forever to come around and eventually be an NHL goalie. And even though that seems to be relatively short-lived, with his struggles in Edmonton, he still managed to do it. Several years later, Jacob Markstrom's another one, who took a while to get consistency in the NHL. And then another guy that I like to equate Sebastian Cossa to, who I think he most reminds me of, is Devin Dubnyk, who's also one of the few guys that went the ECHL route as a goalie. And so all in all, I don't know that you should be smashing the panic button, but you definitely have some concern, and that this is probably the biggest year of Sebastian Cossa's development right now, and you want to see a lot of good things from him this season.
So one of the easy side-by-side comparisons to make with Cossa is always going to be the goalie who was the first-round pick the year before, Yaroslav Askarov, who went number 11 overall to Nashville the year before. Now, there is weird timelines with some draft years for when both these players were drafted because of how COVID and all that stuff worked, but Askarov this past year played 48 games in the AHL, made his NHL debut, was a 911 save percentage goalie in the AHL for the regular season, and is considered their top prospect. If you look at the prospect rankings. Now, the Red Wings have a much better overall prospect pool than Nashville, so obviously that comes into play too. They don't have a Simon Edvinsson in Nashville in the pipe, but Askarov's their number one prospect overall, and in theory would be counted on to play NHL games this year, and was counted on to call last year. Cossa, in theory, based off using kind of the Askarov comparison, should be at that spot this year. He should be around a 9-10 save percentage goalie in the AHL. He should be, if there were to be an injury to Detroit's goalies, it should be that now's the time, we can trust him to play in the NHL game. And now maybe he goes and proves that in camp over the next 2 weeks, and all of a sudden this conversation becomes moot. But right now, that's not the case. It's not the case for me. It's not the case by talking to some others. And he's starting to fall behind by just using the closest comp. And if Cossa were, it's the type of thing too where there's we often talk about Steve Yzerman playing this, people like to say this 3D chess or whatever, but he's also very pragmatic in his approach to things, and sometimes you can read his view of other players by what he does with some others, right? If the Red Wings felt that Cossa was ready to be the AHL goalie and could play in the NHL if needed tomorrow, you're not signing both James Reimer and Alex Lyon. John Letherman is a great story who you signed out of Toledo too. If you felt that Cossa was the only solution, you're probably not that it would, maybe not saying that Letherman doesn't get signed if Kossa's on track, but Letherman is there too because okay, we have to do this. You combine that with taking Trey Augustine in the second round, and I'm always a proponent of taking goalies every draft, but not that high. I'm a proponent of take your gambles on goalies third round and beyond, but Yzerman probably doesn't take a flyer or a bet on Trey Augustine if he's we've got our guy. And so you've mentioned it, we've talked about it. It's the space where you look at his closest comp, you look at his competition in the system, and it's time to it's really, you hate to say it's a put up or shut up season about Cossa, but it is feeling more and more like that right now.
Yeah, 100%. This is definitely the biggest year for him in his development, and we'll sort of see how things shake out. I mean, the comp that I've always pointed to is Devan Dubnyk, just because, it's kind of funny when you look at it, Dubnyk being 6'6", 220 pounds, drafted 14th overall when Kossa's drafted 15th overall, and then follows a similar path kind of out of the WHL to makes a quick stop in the AHL, realizes he's overmatched, goes down to the ECHL, then spends a couple more years in the AHL, and it finally takes him, all the way until his D plus, I think, 5 or D plus 6 year before he really hits the NHL. And I suspect that's what you'll see with Cossa. Now the question is, can he be as productive in the NHL as Dubnyk was? But this is really the biggest year for him to ensure that, those questions don't get louder, those comments don't get louder about, is Sebastian Cossa on track? I think this is definitely the biggest year for him.
Since this is a day and an age where, you're probably listening to this on Friday. If you're listening to this before Friday, we have a bone to pick with Ryan because Ryan is not supposed to be editing before Thursday at the earliest on this. So if you're listening before Friday, you need to send a very angry letter to Ryan Hanna that he needs to work on his life balance. But we're recording this on Tuesday, and earlier we talked a lot about the BioSteel thing. Just a piece of information that came out mid-recording on all of this. The initial list of creditors came out from BioSteel for those owed money, basically. And on the initial list of creditors for money owed right now, and that's the key, money owed that wasn't paid, is BioSteel owes the NHL $8,712,712 Canadian. So that is kind of where things go. The Hurricanes and the Lightning are also listed on that creditor list too, close to $100,000, and then so is USA Hockey, actually, around just under $200,000 Canadian. So that's some new information that came out Tuesday. There'll probably be some new information by the time you listen to this, but it's best to give you everything we have when we have it.
That's always what we strive to do here on Expected by Whom. And so, folks, appreciate you tuning in to another episode. And as always, any questions, comments, concerns, please direct those to the direct messages of Ryan Hanna.